Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're looking at something a little different, the truth is,
Mm.
by Sri H.W.L. Poonja. A lot of people know him as Papaji.
Oh, yeah, Papaji.
And this book is fascinating. It's not your typical, polished, perfectly edited spiritual book.
Right.
This is actually a collection of his talk, so it's really raw,
Yeah.
all from the 90s. So it's spontaneous wisdom, really, just
Bleh.
hitting you right between the eyes.
I like that. Spontaneous wisdom. And you're right. It is really fascinating how it covers so many different topics.
It does.
Even though it's, like you said, not structured in any kind of formal way.
Yeah.
He talks about the self, the ego, what's a true teacher, how do you find freedom. It's all there.
It's all in there.
And all delivered in that really direct style that he's known for.
Yes, very direct. It's like, you're sitting right there listening to him.
You really get that feeling, don't you?
You do. And just looking at the table of contents, I mean, wow, it's like self, grace, the world is illusioned, even tantra sex. But the one that really jumped out at me, and I think might resonate with you listeners too, is you are love dancing as emptiness.
Ooh, I love that. He was so good at, taking these big, complex spiritual truths and putting them into these really beautiful, images. It really draws you in.
Yeah, very poetic too. And right from the start, he throws this at us. Before the beginning, you are pure consciousness. You are the fullness of love and awareness, and the emptiness of peace beyond peace.
Whoa.
Okay, oh wait. Emptiness, fullness,
Mhm.
full of love. How does that work? It's like my brain is just trying to wrap itself around that. And then he follows that with, you are the awareness of objects and ideas. So are we the awareness or the stuff that we're aware of?
Right. Like, which one is it? I think that's the big question, isn't it? He's pointing to this paradox, right, about the self. We're both the dancer, indeed the dance. The
Yeah.
awareness, the stuff we're aware of. Think about it. Think about like a wave in the ocean.
Okay, yeah.
You see the wave. It looks separate, but it's never really apart from the ocean.
It's all ocean.
It's all ocean, exactly.
Okay. I'm starting to see maybe where he's going with this. But if we're this vast awareness, like this ocean, why do we feel so limited? Why do we get so caught up in our own little selves?
Papaji would say that's because we get identified with this small sense of I, this mental construct that comes from, holding on to our bodies and minds. Like we forget who we really are.
So it's like we've forgotten our true nature.
Yeah, it's like we've gotten lost in the play, the Leela of life.
And he even says, he says, in the pure joy creation, your own created Lila and play only in, to play as. It's almost like, we're characters in a movie and we've completely forgotten that there's a screen, there's a projector, there's this whole other reality beyond what's happening in the film.
That's such a great analogy.
And so we think we are these characters.
And the problem is, according to Papaji, that clinging to the I, that forgetting who we are, that's what causes all this suffering.
Because we're constantly chasing after stuff. Right. Trying to be happy. But we're looking in all the wrong places.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to find happiness outside of ourselves when it's already there inside us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Papaji says, method is an impediment to love and an insult to peace.
Wait, what?
Is he saying that all those practices, meditation, yoga, chanting, all those things that we think are part of, growing spiritually, he's either useless?
Well, I don't think he's saying they're totally useless, but I think he's cautioning us against clinging to them. Like they shouldn't become crutches or the means to an end. He's saying that, the truth that we're looking for is already here.
Okay, so it's not about practices then. So how do we get to this truth? What's the path? Do we have to go sit in a cave and meditate for years?
Well, Papaji talks a lot about stillness and self-inquiry, which is called vichara. It's all about turning inward, questioning the nature of the I, and really exploring where your thoughts and feelings come from.
That sounds pretty intense. So are we on our own in this, or is there some kind of guidance?
He talks about the Satguru quite a bit, the true teacher, as someone who can guide us.
Okay, so if it's not about techniques, then what does a teacher actually do? How do they help?
It's more like they don't give you the answers, but they remove the things that are blocking you from seeing the truth that's already inside you. He uses this great analogy. Imagine a king dressed up like a poor man standing in front of a temple.
Oh, okay. So they didn't let him in because they thought he was poor.
They were about to. But then the king revealed who he really was. And Papaji uses this story to show that, the true self, it doesn't need to offer anything, it just is. It doesn't have to earn freedom because it's already free.
That's a powerful image. It makes me think about how we often go into like spirituality with this feeling of being not enough. Like we have to do things, achieve things to be worthy.
Right.
And he's saying, no, you already are.
It's a total shift in perspective.
It is.
Yeah. Like we've been looking for our glasses and they're on our head the whole time.
Right. But if it's about recognizing that freedom, that's already there, then how does that actually work in real life? Like, okay, we're not kings. We've got jobs, responsibilities, kids, relationships, all this stuff pulling at us. So how do you stay connected to that sense of just being, amidst all that doing?
Well, Papaji gives us some pretty practical advice. It really comes down to like a shift in perspective. He says, so when something comes in front of you, just stay as the truth, which does not move, and react to the circumstances, whatever they may be, good or bad.
That's easier said than done, though, right? Like
Right.
staying is the truth when you've got like a screaming toddler or a ton of work emails.
Oh, absolutely. But what he's getting at is that truth, the self, it's always there no matter what's happening around you. It's like the screen in a movie theater, right? The images change, but the screen itself stays the same.
I like that. It's a good visual. It reminds me of something else he said. There is no direct practice to know yourself. So there's no practice, then how do we actually start, like, how do we even start this journey of discovering who we really are?
I think that's the beauty of it. The journey just kind of unfolds naturally when you stop holding on to this idea that you're this separate self, this I.
Okay, so much of what we've been talking about really hinges on this idea of the Satguru, the true teacher. I'm kind of curious to dig into that a little bit more. In the book, he says the Satguru is truth, awareness, bliss, and is like the sun. You no longer need a torch to see, and you do not understand the language of the self. What does that even mean?
Oof, yeah, that's a powerful metaphor. He's saying that the Satguru, in his view, isn't like a typical teacher, someone who just gives you information. They're more like a catalyst, like someone who helps you wake up to the truth that's already there inside you.
Okay. So they're not giving you steps to follow or rituals to do.
No, not at all. In fact, Papaji is very clear about that. He even says, the true teacher has no teachings, the true teacher has no students.
Whoa, that's a little mind-blowing, isn't it? How can you have a teacher with no teachings and no students?
It's a paradox, right? But it points to like the very nature of the self. Remember, the self is already free, already enlightened, so there's nothing to teach and no one to teach it to.
Okay, but people went to see Papaji, they sat with him, they asked him questions.
Hmm.
So if it wasn't teaching, what was he doing?
Well, he would say he was just removing doubts, pointing people towards the truth that was already there inside them. He often compared it to like holding up a finger to point at the moon. The finger's not the moon, but it helps you see it.
Ah, okay. So the Satguru is like that finger helping you, like, focus your attention.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't cling to the finger once you see the moon, you wouldn't cling to the Satguru once you've recognized the self.
You mentioned something else, that he rejected the language of the self. What did he mean by that?
He really believed that words and concepts can actually get in the way of like really experiencing the self. They create a sense of separation, of duality, when in reality, the self is beyond all that.
But if it's beyond words, then how do you even talk about it?
Hmm.
How do you think about it?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, isn't it? Papaji would say the best way is through silence and stillness. He's a big advocate for what's called vichara, self-inquiry, turning inward to really experience the truth directly.
It seems like a lot of what he talks about is about letting go of the I, letting go of ideas, letting go of methods. It's almost like radical surrender in a way.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of surrender there, but it's not passive, It's a surrender that comes from understanding. Once you realize that the true self is already free, already whole, there's nothing left to strive for.
And in the book, he talks about signs and symptoms of imminent freedom. Like, what are the signs that someone's, close to this self-realization?
He mentions things like a really strong desire for freedom, a sense of peace and stillness, and not identifying so much with your body and mind.
I remember that burning desire for freedom. He describes it like a fire that just consumes everything else. It's not about wanting things in the world, but a longing to be free from suffering, from all the limitations.
And he says that longing is a sign of grace. It's not something you can create. It just shows up when the time is right.
Which makes me think about how he talked about, like, the circumstances that lead someone to a true teacher. He used the analogy of a fish being pulled in by a line. He said, "There is such a magic coming from here. I feel that I was pulled from the other side of the planet like a fish is pulled in by the line."
He's really emphasizing that meeting a true teacher, coming into contact with the truth, it's not just random. There's like a bigger force at work, something beyond our understanding.
And speaking of things that can get in the way, he talks a lot about the ego and how it can block freedom. For example, he says, "So only destroy what you think is a destroyer, because the desire for freedom will help you. Think only of freedom, and you become freedom. As persistent as the pain of a toothache, always think of self, then all other habits and distractions will drop away."
Right, the ego, with all its attachments and desires, it can be a big obstacle on this path. It creates that illusion of separation, of being just this limited individual when really we're limitless.
He uses a lot of great analogies, like the one with the wave and the ocean. He says, as waves rise, the ocean gains nothing. As waves fall, the ocean loses nothing.
That's so powerful, isn't it? It shows how temporary our individual self is, the I that we hold on to. Just like the wave rises and falls back into the ocean, our little selves eventually dissolve back into that vastness of the self.
And when that happens, you're not afraid of death anymore or loss, because you understand that nothing's really lost or gained.
Right, there's this incredible sense of liberation when you realize how impermanent everything is.
Okay, this is all very profound, but I got to be honest, it's kind of mind-bending. How do we make sense of this idea of being limitless when, in our everyday life we experience ourselves as these individuals with bodies, minds, personalities?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Papaji addresses that directly. He's not denying that individuals exist. He's saying that they exist, but within the context of the self. Like, think about a king who's taking care of his garden.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. He says, "As the king can be in the garden of the world and remain I am, it is you who is active in all the activities of the world."
Exactly. So the self is like the king who can be present in the garden, but still remain separate from it.
So we're not supposed to reject our lives, but see them as part of something bigger, like a divine play.
Exactly. And that's where that beautiful image of love dancing as emptiness comes in. It's that paradox of being both individual and universal, finite and infinite.
There's another part where he says, so when you call him Buddha, what personality comes to mind? So the wise one does not do this. The wise one lords over everything, from this beauty of no mind and no will. What's he saying there?
I think he's warning us against getting attached to names and forms, even those of, these great spiritual figures. True worship, for Papaji, isn't about putting someone on a pedestal, but recognizing the divinity within yourself.
So powerful. It's like a reminder that the goal isn't to become someone else, but to wake up to who you already are.
That's it.
And that realization, he says, doesn't come through effort, but through grace.
Exact.
He says, the grace of self gives rise to the desire for freedom. The grace of God brings you to the Guru. The grace of the Guru removes all doubts and leaves only freedom. So grace seems to be at the heart of it all.
It's like the underlying current that moves you towards self-realization. You can't earn it, you can't control it, it's just a gift given when the time is right.
I'm struck by how he talks about the experience of freedom. It's a state of peace, stillness, being beyond all limits. It sounds incredibly blissful.
Oh, it is, and it's available to everyone. But he's also clear that it's not something you can grasp or hold on to. It's more like a recognition, a seeing through the illusion.
There's a line that really stood out to me. Don't be shy of your own self. Open your eyes and see. It's like an invitation to really look within and see what's already there.
It is an invitation. And it's for everyone, no matter who you are, what you believe, what you've experienced. The truth is always there, waiting to be seen.
I'm really curious to hear more about his ideas on self-inquiry. There's a whole section in the book on vichar, which is the Sanskrit word for self-inquiry. What exactly is that?
Yeah, vichar is a big part of Papaji's teachings. It's the process of turning inward, questioning who you think you are, looking for the source of your thoughts and feelings.
So it's not about analyzing your thoughts or trying to figure them out, but more like going back to where they come from.
Exactly. And he gives some pretty specific guidance on how to do that.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the Papaji method for self-inquiry?
Well, one of the key things is to just be quiet and watch your thoughts as they come up. He says simply stay as the truth, which does not move, and react to the circumstances, whatever they may be, good or bad.
So you're not trying to get rid of them or make them go away, but just observe them without getting caught up in them.
Right, like watching clouds move across the sky. You're not trying to change them or control them, you're just seeing them.
I can see how that would be helpful, but how does that lead to self-realization?
Well, when you can see your thoughts without identifying with them, you start to see how impermanent they are. They come, they go, and that space between them, that's where the truth is.
He also talks about asking the question, who am I? Is that part of this?
It can be, yeah. But he's careful to say that you shouldn't just use it mechanically. It has to come from a place of sincere inquiry.
So it's not about repeating it like a mantra, but letting it emerge from a real desire to know the truth.
Exactly. And when it comes from that place, it can really cut through all the layers of conditioning and reveal the truth of the self.
So what about the practical side of this? Does he have any specific techniques or methods for doing vichara?
He actually says to be careful about relying on methods. He says true self-inquiry is effortless. It's not about doing, but about being.
But if it's effortless, how do you do it? How do you practice something that's not a practice?
That's the paradox, right? He's saying that effort itself is what blocks the realization. It's like trying to hold onto water. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away.
So it's more about letting go, surrendering to what is.
Exactly. And when you do that, when you stop clinging to ideas and methods, the truth just reveals itself.
It seems like a lot of trust is involved. Trust in the teachings, trust in the Satguru, trust in your own self.
Oh, absolutely. Trust is key. And Papaji says it's not blind trust, it's a trust that comes from understanding.
And how do we get that understanding? Is it through reading or going to satsangs or meditating?
Those things can help, but ultimately understanding comes from direct experience. It's about turning inward and seeing for yourself what Papaji is pointing to.
He also goes into some detail about what happens after death. For example, he says, when the individual I and its vasanas suffer, know that you are the truth which does not move, and it is the truth which is doing this unity in doing. You are that. You are that. What does that mean?
He's saying that even though our bodies and minds will eventually die, the true self is eternal. It doesn't change.
So he's saying that the self isn't something you become after you die, is what you already are.
Exactly. Death is just a transition, like changing clothes. The true self is beyond birth and death. It's the foundation of all experience.
There's a real fearlessness in his teachings, a sense that death isn't the end, just a change in form.
That's right. And that fearlessness, he says, comes naturally with self-realization. When you know who you truly are, there's nothing to be afraid of.
I'm curious about what he says about enlightenment. What does he say about that state?
He describes it as peace, bliss, complete freedom from suffering. But he's clear that it's not something you achieve through effort. It's a grace that comes when the time is right.
So it's not about becoming someone special or getting superpowers, but about recognizing the truth of who you already are.
Exactly. And he says that realization isn't something that happens in the future. It's available right now.
This is a lot to take in. Papaji's teachings are definitely challenging, but also so inspiring. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but his words will keep unfolding and revealing new layers of meaning as we go deeper.
That's the beauty of it. The truth is inexhaustible. There's always more to discover.
And for those of you listening, I really encourage you to pick up The Truth Is and explore Papaji's world for yourselves. You might be surprised by what you find. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep your hearts open to the truth. When we've been going through all this, it just keeps coming back to me, this idea that true freedom, it's not something you get, it's something you already are.
It really is a whole different way of looking at things, isn't it? And Papaji makes it clear that this realization, it comes from grace, not from anything we do.
But then, in the book, he has this whole section on Vishar, self-inquiry. Those two things seem kind of at odds. Like, if freedom is already there, then why bother inquiring?
That is a great question, and it really gets to the core of what Papaji's trying to show us. He's not saying self-inquiry is some technique to get you to freedom. It's more about getting rid of the stuff that's blocking you from seeing the freedom that's already there.
Oh, okay. So, it's like you've got a diamond, but it's covered with dirt. The diamond's perfect. It just needs to be cleaned off.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the dirt, in this case, is our attachment to the body, the mind, the ego. Papaji even calls this identification a lie, a reflection of true self in the conditioning of ego body. He even goes so far as to say that you are the substratum of everything, and even space and time derive their existence from it.
Oh, that's a big one. So he's saying the self is like the ground of everything, like the source of everything.
Yeah. And when we identify with that small self, that little I, we create this illusion of being separate from the true self.
And that separation, like we've been talking about, That's where the suffering comes from. We feel incomplete, like something's missing, and we're always trying to fill that hole.
But Papaji says the whole itself is an illusion. It's just that we're not seeing our true nature.
Okay, so the problem is we're misidentified. So how do we break free from that? How do we shift our identification to the real self?
That's where self-inquiry comes in, Vichara, by asking, who am I? Really digging deep, tracing your thoughts and feelings back to where they come from. You start to see through that illusion of separation.
Papaji talks about it like turning around, a shift in perspective. He says, turn your face inward toward the source of I. Turn to reflect the unmanifested on the mind. It's like we've been looking the wrong way this whole time and we need to turn around to look inside.
And that turning inward, it's not forced. It happens when it's meant to happen through grace.
Now, he also says that method is an impediment to love and an insult to peace. But isn't self-inquiry a kind of method? Like you're asking questions, observing your thoughts. It seems like a process.
There is a process, but it's not a method in the sense of like a technique to get something. It's more like a natural unfolding, discovering what's already there.
So being, not doing.
Exactly. And that being, that's the true self, the self that's beyond all the labels and descriptions.
This all makes me think about what he says about the Satguru, the true teacher. He writes, the true teacher will not be recognized by the diamonds on his head or by the number of students he has. Know the teacher to be the one whose presence gives you peace, and whose presence gives you the house of false convictions, and removes all cravings, attachment, and desire. The Jnani's torch burns down the house of desire, but as Kabir says, nobody takes this fire. It sounds like finding a true teacher is a really rare and precious thing.
It is, and it's a gift that people often don't even recognize. We tend to look for teachers who will tell us what we want to hear, who will make things easy. But a true teacher, in Papaji's view, they'll challenge you, they'll push you to let go of all the things you're holding on to.
And in that letting go, that's where the real freedom is.
It's funny, right? We think freedom is about getting something, achieving something. But it's actually about letting go of everything we think we are.
That makes me think about what he says about desire. He says, this shortcut is to cut short your desires. Objects of desires are not what give happiness. They destroy your peace and not you with suffering.
He's showing us that desire is a form of being trapped. It keeps us going in circles, always seeking, never finding.
So he's saying that real happiness isn't about getting what you want, but about not wanting anything.
Right. When you're free from wanting, you're free to experience the peace and joy that are already inside you.
I'm starting to see how all of this fits together. Self-inquiry, grace, the Satguru, the nature of desire. It's all pointing to this idea that freedom is already here. We just have to recognize it.
And that recognition, like Papaji says, it's not just a mental thing. It's a direct experience, a shift in how you see the world that changes everything.
Like waking up from a dream.
Yes, and Papaji calls that self-realization.
Wow, this has been quite a deep dive into Papaji's world. We've only just scratched the surface, but his teachings are so rich and thought-provoking. I know they'll keep unfolding for me, and I hope for you too.
That's the beauty of Papaji's message. It's timeless and universal. It can resonate with anyone and guide us on our own journeys of self-discovery.
So to all of you listening, we really encourage you to check out The Truth Is and explore Papaji's teachings for yourselves. You might be surprised by what you discover. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep your hearts open to the truth.